I'd like to say hello to our internet audience. Thank you so much for joining us today here for the 2023 BETD. It's such a pleasure to welcome my guests on the stage today for our first panel in the Europasaal, entitled Staying on Track While Securing Supply. We're going to have a few rounds of questions. At some point, I hope that a dialogue between all of you takes over. Right now, I'd like to introduce our guests for this panel. Seated just to my left is Karolina Novák, the State Secretary for Decarbonization at the Energy Ministry of the Republic of Moldova. Benoit Rivaz, the Director of the Federal Office of Energy in Switzerland. Antonella Battaglini, the CEO of Renewables Grid Initiative in Germany. Claire McLaughlin, the Head of the Energy Division, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water in Australia. And Adrian Chua, the Deputy Secretary and Chief Sustainability Officer at the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Singapore. Thank you so much, panelists, for joining me today. A round of applause for all of our panelists for making it here. Panelists, our guiding question today is, how can the global energy crisis be addressed by increasing energy security and avoiding energy poverty while we take those urgently needed steps towards climate introduction? That's our guiding question for today. But I'd like to start off with some questions for each of you individually. Karolina Novák, I'd like to start with you. You've said that the 2022 energy crisis in Moldova was the worst crisis ever for the country. I want to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about what this meant for your country over the course of the past winter, and what lessons did you learn about how to best secure energy for the next winter?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to say it's like a fish in the aquarium, because it's like such an amazing pool of people and experts. But to answer your question, 2022 was by far the worst crisis I think my country faced. And before the war started in Ukraine, we used to be fully dependent by the Russian gas. It was one source. And out of that source, we are also producing up to 70% of our electricity supplies. Then what happens? The war starts in February. I remember generally that day was right after 3 weeks when I started my job. And it was in the midst of, it was actually a storm of crises, in fact, because we had still the crisis of COVID. Then there was a refugee crisis, since we are next to the border with Ukraine. That followed with an energy crisis, and inevitably we had as well an inflation of up to 34%. And then you have economic recession, and your GDP is being affected. And then you have 70% of the energy poverty in Moldova. So it was all of this crisis hitting on our government. There was a high possibility of protests and then even toppling the government, I would say. But no matter what, it was initially, a survival mode in the midst of all of this crisis, because then Gazprom reduced its supplies as of October 2022. It started in October 2021, when actually Europe continued to get its gas from Russia, but we already had this shock before. And I must admit, it was a lot of the first times for us, no matter the crisis, the spectrum of it all. We first time actually bought gas on the spot market. We first time diversified fully all our supplies to the extent that 70% are non-Russian gas sources. First time we actually bought electricity on the spot market, because there was not much willingness before. It was a certain inertia. We scaled up our renewables, so it was a lot of first time. And that helped us to actually do this leapfrog in a way, because certain plans we had in terms of electricity, grids, but also I would even say the diversification of gas supplies, it was not really in the pipeline before, because it was just comfortable as it was. And then you have a force majeure shock, which pushes you and you overhaul the whole system of the energy system. So this is just in the full scale of how it was for us. But there were a lot of lessons learned, and the lesson learned here was we don't have fossil fuels, we don't have oil, gas, but then let's invest into renewables, and because it also brings us energy independency. Let's build on what we have on our land and also provide jobs. It's the full circular activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good lessons learned when it comes to renewable energies. Benoit Revaz, we're going to stick with renewable energies for you. Switzerland is already dependent on Germany and France, especially in winter, and with nuclear power set to phase out in Switzerland in 2034. This dependency could increase further if the expansion of renewable energies and sector coupling aren't decisively driven forward. What are your plans? What are Switzerland's plans and actions in order to make renewable energies, to bring them forward during the next few years?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for the invitation today to this panel. Actually, Switzerland faces two challenges. We won't replace the nuclear power plants at the end of the operation, and this will be in the next decades. There is no time limit for the operation of the nuclear power plants. The security is the only criteria. And at the same time, we have our climate goals with the decarbonization. So meeting both goals together will mean an acceleration of the development of new renewables in Switzerland, a reinforcement of the existing capacities, especially the hydro capacities and the extension of the hydro reservoirs. So the first pillars is to extend the electrons produced in Switzerland. The second one is the quality, so to push water from the summer to the winter by extending the reservoirs. And probably the most challenging point is on the demand side, because this is the very first resource we do have, all states do have. And to accelerate the increase of efficiency at households, heating, cooling, processes in industries. And this is a huge challenge, but this is now an investment considering the prices we had in 2022 and still have in 2023. And of course, it won't come by itself. There is a lot of investment, engagement, and also we need workforces to accelerate that over the next years.
Thank you very much. We're going to have a panel here tomorrow about specialized workforces, if you're joining us for day two. Antonella Battaglini, Renewables Grid Initiative. So the European power system is responding to energy and climate concerns by increasing the share of renewable energy, which we've just heard. In the next years and decades, renewable energy will be the main component of the European power mix. Can you describe to us a little bit about how the Renewables Grid Initiative comes into play here?
So thank you very much for the invitation. And let me start by saying that if you want renewables, you need to want grids. Because building renewables and not having the grid that connects them to the areas where they are needed, you have done nothing. And for many, many years, we have been pushing for renewables, but we have not dared to talk and promote grids because they are not very attractive. And today we see that not only in Europe, but globally, we have bottlenecks to the growth of renewables that is really coming from the inability of the grids to integrate fast enough. So this is what we do with the Renewables Grid Initiative, which is a very strange organization. And so allow me to mention that this is an association of transmission system operators and environmental and climate NGOs. Because what we are talking about here is that how do we deliver this energy transition that we need with the time we need, which is really not much, but also in a fair way, because resources are limited. And so how do we put in place this massive amount of infrastructure that is needed without impacting nature and taking people along? Because what you don't want is to go against people. This energy transition is for people, and you got to do with the people. And of course, we do have a global energy crisis, but we also have a global financial crisis, we have a global biodiversity crisis, and we have an increasingly global water crisis. Just one more word. Complexity will give us the sustainable solutions. If we look for solutions sector by sector, if we want to fix this and that, we will fail. But if we look horizontally, then we will find the solutions that fit all these needs.
Thank you very much. Claire McLaughlin, so Carlina Novak told us a little bit about some of the lessons that they've learned. I want to know from you, from Australia's perspective, what is Australia's experience of the energy transition, and are there lessons that can be shared? We have to do this together.
Thanks very much, and it's fantastic to be here. Very happy to have been invited. So in response to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the European community took bold action to ensure energy system security. But the consequences of Russia's aggression have reshaped global energy markets, and energy security implications have been felt, of course, well beyond Europe. Impacts of supply of gas to Europe in June last year caused an unprecedented price rise in Australia that required the market operator to suspend our spot market for the first time. Energy security and the clean energy transition are now inextricably linked. Acceleration of decarbonisation in the energy sector is both essential to reach global climate goals and, as importantly, decrease dependence, particularly on unreliable energy partners. But transition itself also inherently brings risks that need to be actively managed. So picking up on some of your points about the grid, Australia is ahead globally on renewables integration. More than 50% of generation in our national electricity market is coming from photovoltaics, and we are encountering some of these challenges about integration and what the implications are for the grid, potentially earlier than other parts of the world. So I guess social licence is a key point. You made the point, Antonella, about bringing people with us. The scale of what we need to do in the world, but from my point of view, particularly in Australia, to achieve what we are trying to do is extraordinary. And at the moment, 1 in 3 households in Australia has solar panels on its roof. And parts of our grid have been supplied by 90+% of renewables. But to meet our targets of 82% renewable electricity Australia-wide, we have to increase investment, deployment and access to renewable energy sources. We need, for example, 30 times the amount of storage, 9 times the amount of wind and 9 times the amount of rooftop and utility scale PV, and an investment 4 times larger than our annual energy investment to get to net zero. A fact that I was stunned to discover is that to support grid-scale uplift of renewables, Australia will need at least 10,000 kilometres of new transmission, equal to the linear distance from Singapore to London, which some of us flew a couple of days ago, and it's a very long way. So for us, questions about social licence, about how you engage with people in a conversation about offshore wind, about building new power lines through agricultural and Indigenous lands, these are big challenges that we're grappling with at the moment, and that the crisis of the last year or so has brought into really sharp relief for us.
Thank you very much, Claire McLaughlin. Adrian Chua, Singapore is a small, unlike Australia, small and densely populated country with very limited natural resources when it comes to renewable energies. Could you please tell us some more about your specific situation and how Singapore has overcome the volatile energy markets in the past few years?
Thank you. So Singapore, yes, we are a very small country and we are alternative energy disadvantaged. So it's a very small place and we don't have a lot of capacity to install solar panels. And even though we're in the tropics, there's heavy cloud cover, so solar is very limited. And we don't have tidal energy or wind energy. So we're very limited. So for us as a small country, it's important that international trade in renewables facilitates our transition. I thought that the comment that the German foreign minister made this morning, that we need to find joint solutions, is a particularly important one. So I think international trade in renewables in all its forms, whether it's in the form of trade in electrons, trade in molecules, or trade in carbon, whether for sequestration or in the form of credits, is going to be key for the global community to reach its net zero target. So that's particularly important. The other important thing that we took away from the current crisis is that it's important to continue to invest in key transition fuels. So if you look at the renewables, hydrogen, for example, and Singapore announced its hydrogen strategy last year, hydrogen is going to, by the most optimistic projections, is only going to be viable post-2030. And it's going to be very important to continue to invest in transition fuels. And of course, natural gas is an important form of transition fuel. So we need to continue to invest in that to make sure that countries are able to transit, particularly those who are still relying on coal. So in many parts of the world, I think there's a heavy reliance on coal. So just the transition from coal to natural gas alone can cut emissions by 50% in the power generation sector. So that's an important lesson that we took away for our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I saw each of you taking notes and nodding as the other individuals were speaking on stage. And starting now, if someone says something, I want you to feel free to jump in and respond if you have. Can we do that? Let's wait one round. You'll be up in a minute. I want to come back here to Karolina Novak. You talked a little bit about these different crises that happened starting in February of last year. And you're under enormous pressure because of the border you share with Ukraine. How do you, the title of the session is Staying on Track. How do you stay on track? How do you stay focused on an energy transition when you're dealing with this immense pressure?
Because simply there is no any other option than to undergo through this transition. Because the later you jump into the energy transition, the more costly it is. Then the downside actually for a country like Moldova is actually being next to a war zone country where the interest rates are high, so probably you don't have the most favorable, suitable financial conditions in that sense. But actually in the earlier speech of the Minister Annalena Baerbock, she mentioned the climate justice. And I was actually thinking that there must be some sort of a formula or a solution, a sort of a panacea at the global level on funding solutions in terms of climate options. Because I think you cannot have the same interest rate for the fossil fuel technologies versus the net zero ones. And it must be just more fair and correct for these respective technologies. Now, we already see, and of course you have then the different subsidy schemes for renewables. We already see that renewables reach that maturity level. So, as I said, this is for us a way to get the independence in terms of the energy sector. So actually, now that we have a specialized energy ministry, before it was in a broader one, we have actually three priorities. So first is deployment of renewables with storage, since we have a poor, I would say, balancing market, which is quite relevant for renewables. Second is the low-hanging fruit with the energy efficiency. So we've already seen that we can shape people's behavior in terms of energy consumption when prices are skyrocketing, and for us it was like 9 times higher within a year. The gas prices went just beyond the roof. The same with electricity prices, 4 times higher. So we've seen a decrease in consumption. But then we've also realized, okay, we can actually do it in a more coordinated horizontal approach where we can deploy energy efficiency programs for both public institutions, but also residential sector. And there is a demand for that. However, you have to shape it, because then again, people don't really understand. And in Eastern Europe, perhaps there's this belief that if you tell people to reduce consumption, they have a memory perhaps of the communism when they had to do that by default. And then the third priority for us, it's deploying these innovation sandboxes, meaning creating some sort of a favorable regulatory environment where we can deploy these clean tech technologies. I mean, just think about the fact that no one will invest in Russia given the current situation. Now in Moldova, we are also speaking Russian, so it's a high-skilled society with low OPEX, so there are plenty of opportunities ahead which we want to untap. Thank you.
Thank you. Benoit Rivaz, we were on a panel together last year, and so I get to ask you a question a little bit naively. But first, on the way to the energy transition, there's often an interplay of engagement, encouragement, and demand. Like Australia, many states promote renewable energies in one way or another, and I know that Switzerland is discussing a solar obligation. I want you to explain this in a little bit more detail, and here comes my kind of naive question. Australia is saying, yes, we're going to put solar panels on the roofs. Why can't solar systems on the roofs in Switzerland just be compulsory?
Thank you for this question. Actually, it's a very political discussion at the parliament level, because we don't like to give restrictions or obligations in Switzerland. We very much count on initiative, public-private initiative to move things. And then, of course, especially with the high prices that we face right now for new buildings, you probably don't need an obligation in order to promote new renewables. So we are rather working on we will see what the parliament finally decides, but we are rather working on initiative on putting the frame in order to make it valuable, not only to put solar panels on the rooftop, but also to install a loading station for EV, a heat pump, and to put some smartness in a system, and also to integrate it. This was the question of the investment in the infrastructure. If we make it smarter, we will reduce the needed investment on the infrastructure. And coming back to that point is, probably we all our economies have been addicted to low prices of fossil fuels and molecules, and now we saw the reality and we face the reality, and to accelerate the transition in one step, but it's also to have a mid-long-term view, because now we are using the infrastructure that were built by our predecessors, and this has a huge value. But with all these market short-term views, we cut the view on the needed investment in the infrastructure. So to combine distributed solutions with large infrastructure and to improve the grid infrastructure will be key and will bring much more than an obligation for solar rooftops. And the last point, what we saw also, coming back to the efficiency, we started an initiative last year, an alliance for energy efficiency, because we are the opinion, if we take the different peer groups, public, the different corporations, economics, and we mobilize those groups so let's capture the low-hanging fruits and let's see what kind of solution are needed to invest in efficiency. It's much more promising than putting new rules or obligation in any law.
Thank you very much, Benoit Rivaz. Antonella Battalini, I know you want to respond to someone. I want to ask you a question first, though. A country's scarcity of resources obviously can influence decarbonization efforts. We have Adrian Chua here from Singapore, and we can use Singapore as an example. Because there is a lack of space, for example, for a large PV plant or for windmills, what roles then do grids play in this context? You mentioned this earlier, but I want to know a little bit more.
I think scarcity of resources is becoming one of the topics I talk about in every single panel, so apologies. Essentially, I believe that is also connected to what you just said, is that you have an infrastructure in place, you have a target, and you have limited resources. It's not just scarcity of something, it's a scarcity of everything, including workforce, including space, including resources, natural resources, water, whatever. So planning the system of the future, the system for the end game, when we have reached 100% decarbonization, whatever with renewables, 100% renewables, or close to that, doesn't matter. But you need to plan for the end game. This implies that you need to optimize all processes and understand what do you need, when, and who needs what. Today we have seen a huge push for hydrogen. We have seen a lot of emergency measures as a response to the energy crisis. But are these really what will deliver full decarbonization or not? So from a system perspective, we need to know that without grids, you probably make it much harder to get full decarbonization. But also without supporting and prioritizing electrification, your full decarbonization will be much more expensive and much more resource intensive because of the conversion losses. That said, every single component in the system has a role to play and is essential. But it's not possible that we keep the mentality of yesterday that anyone is free to choose whatever, because we don't have this luxury. We need to channel resources where they are giving the best or the highest impact. And so from an energy system point of view, electrification needs to be prioritized. Molecules have to be channeled to those that really need it, and not simply think, okay, this sector is using gas or coal, and therefore they need hydrogen. Probably not. They will need a share of it and a share of something else. And this exercise is important because people ask, do we really need this? What is the amount of commitment that we ask people to give? And what is the amount of money that we have? So optimization is my answer. Thank you.
Optimization, thank you very much. Claire McLaughlin, I saw you nodding a few times, and so of course I want to make sure you have a chance to respond, and I wonder if you can do that, because Antonella talked a bit about resources, and my next question for you is, Australia has lots of resources. You have lots of space, you have lots of sun. That's got to also, like, there have to be challenges. What are your challenges? How are you overcoming them in Australia?
Yeah, we do. Very happily have lots of sun and lots of space, and Adrian and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday. But there are lots of challenges. You know, how do we manage a decarbonisation agenda and a transition in which we keep having energy that is affordable as well as reliable and sustainable? And you know, picking up on your comments about mandating things like solar PV, we're at a third of households having panels on their roofs by choice, and with government incentives and feed-in tariffs, particularly in the early days. But the acceleration of that, so I think 12 months ago it was 1 in 4, now it's 1 in 3, and that's a response to energy prices. So, you know, the challenge is how we balance all of these things at once, and keeping the lights on, keeping industry moving, while we're trying to decarbonise, means that we have to think about energy security and decarbonisation as part of the same issue, not as competing issues that are in tension. I guess one of our other challenges, and it goes to social licence, and some of the comments that have already been made, is that, you know, our view is that we're going to need the ongoing use of gas as an enabling and firming fuel through the transition. And having a conversation with communities about putting transmission lines through their farm or building wind turbines off the beautiful coast of southern Victoria is one thing, but having a conversation about the fact that we are going to continue to need gas as part of the transition is another. And so that sort of social licence, how do we have the public conversation about that when the narrative is next to electrifying everything we can, along with a whole lot of work around energy efficiency and making sure that our houses are fit for purpose is a huge challenge for us.
Thank you very much. I want to come back to some of these challenges in the next round of questions, but first, I'd like to ask Adrian Chua, again, from Singapore. What's Singapore's perspective when it comes to the most important steps for the energy transition?
Yeah, in responding to that, I thought that I'd pick up a point that Antonella mentioned just now, which is the importance of optimization. So I think optimization is key. And I think in Europe here, you have an interesting model of regional electricity interconnectors. So Spain, for example, is exporting electricity to Portugal, France, and then I think Germany doing the similar things. So in our part of the world, in ASEAN, we're working very hard towards a regional ASEAN power grid. And we've made a start on that. So we are now importing, we have electricity trade between Malaysia and Singapore. And we also recently, 2 weeks ago, signed a memorandum of understanding with Indonesia, where we've agreed to invest in green energy and green manufacturing, as well as facilitate the trade of renewable energy. So that's an important development in ASEAN and an important part of optimization. The other key part, I think, to the solution is that the solution can't just take just from the supply side. I think we've also got to have solutions on the demand side. And I think a key part of that is right pricing electricity and right pricing carbon. So our approach in Singapore throughout the crisis over the past year and a half is that we've right-priced electricity. So the government has not subsidized electricity for our consumers. We've right-priced it, and what we've done is for the those that need help, the low-income households and so on, we've provided very targeted support. But otherwise, everyone has to pay the fair price for electricity. And likewise, I think in the area of carbon, it's important to price carbon correctly. And I think you have a system here in Europe. In Singapore, we've introduced a carbon tax. And I think we're the first in Southeast Asia to do that. And that's important, I think, to right price that across our economies. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up on what you just talked about, reducing demand. You mentioned this as well. I know that this past winter in Germany, beforehand, we all bought blankets and we were asked, conserve your energy. And in her keynote this morning, our young activist, Lisipriya Kangujam, said, there are too many of us demanding too much from our planet. And she's not wrong. And this is to each of you. What's the role of reducing energy demand in this context?
Well, clearly it has firstly an impact on the emissions. That's at least how I see it in the first place. And it's healthier towards the planet, it's more sustainable. Because I think when we say affordable energy, yes, but then it has to be also sustainable. And because ultimately, in the long run, you then affect the whole environment. So you have bigger losses that are not fixable. So you have to. I think it's actually the way you see it. It is the magic triangle. You have it in energy, right? And you've mentioned as well. I think it has to be reliable, because in absence of it, you cannot have it sustainable, and definitely has to be affordable, because otherwise no one will support the sustainability element. But if I may, I would like to come to Antonella's point on the grid importance, because I think in Moldova's case, this is literally quite a replica. I would apply it very, very well, in the sense that the transportation grid, for instance, because it was not well developed and we did not build sufficient interconnections with Romania, just with Ukraine. Clearly, we were exposed when the war started and had 2 blackouts. But because of missing interconnections with Romania, we couldn't roll out massive renewables, because what do you do with the excess and you don't have storage? And equally goes on net metering. So prosumers, quite a few prosumers, they reached out to me as well. They couldn't install net metering because the distribution grid could not, it was a limited capacity, or it was not sufficiently resilient. So the grids are absolutely important before just rolling out renewables projects. They have to go hand in hand, or even before actually the renewables projects are being deployed. because then it takes longer at times.
Thank you very much. Antonella, I think you want to respond.
Grids in many parts of the world are regulated assets. The energy regulators have, and continue to have, the mandate to make it electricity and energy as cheap as possible for consumers. And for these reasons, have somehow delayed for too long the build-up of the grids. Today, we know that we need to anticipate investments into certain type of infrastructure to be able to grow renewables at the scale we are discussing in this conference. And I fully agree with Mr. Chu, the fact that a lot of innovation will come from the demand side. A lot of efficiency will come from the demand side. And so putting in place the right incentives to not only shape the demand, but also for the demand to provide flexibility services to the system is fundamental. So it's not about telling people what to do, but really putting the right incentives and the needed digital tools to make this automatic. It is not to, we don't need each individual to take a decision, I use now this or that, but rather a system, an automated system that reacts to a system. And of course, how do we handle with the only one planet constraint that we have? I think we can start by reducing waste. And if you look in the energy system, we have a lot of waste. 60% of primary energy is wasted. It doesn't get to the consumption side.
Thank you. Benoit Ravasi, please.
Yes, coming back to the point of the efficiency. In Switzerland, we spent hundreds of millions last year to add reserve capacity in the system. And when we face scarcity, to add electrons or molecules, it costs so much. And this should be the main driver to avoid these costs. And of course, the flexible tariffication is an important part. And at the end of the day, for the electricity, to avoid stranded investment in hardware, the digitalization of the grids will be key. And even in a country like Switzerland, we are far away from what we have to reach in that domain. And it will take probably until the end of this decade to reach a proper level of digitalization that can help to catch these values of the flexibility in the system.
Thank you. Claire McLaughlin.
Thank you. So one of the things that others have talked about, us having all been addicted to cheap energy for a long time. One of the things about Australia having so much sun and wind is that we, have a tendency to want to use that all the time as well. And so one of the things that our new government is committed to as a pillar of our decarbonisation strategy is reducing energy demand, even though we have plenty of energy at some times of the day, but of course not necessarily always when we need it. And so the National Energy Performance Strategy is being developed to really accelerate thinking and action and put in place the regulations and the frameworks to make sure that we can reduce energy demand in households and businesses, promote the switching to heat pumps and so on, before we just say electrify everything, because we need to be able to electrify fewer things. So that's the sort of perspective that the Australian government's taking, and that's a very current active piece of work that we need to do to get to our net zero targets.
Yes, please, Adrian Chua.
Just wanted to add that I fully agree with Claire that reducing energy demand is important. So apart from right pricing, it's also important to help industries build the capacity to reduce energy demand and to increase the energy efficiency. So what we've tried to do in Singapore is that we put in place an energy efficiency grant where we help small and medium-sized enterprises who want to decarbonize, who want to reduce their energy demand, to purchase and implement new energy-efficient equipment. So we, as part of this grant, we support up to 70% of the cost of installation of these energy-efficient equipment, and that's a key part of our strategy. The other thing that we're helping the SMEs do is to understand what is their carbon footprint. So putting in place schemes where we help train them to understand how do you go about measuring your carbon footprint and how might you put in place a strategy to reduce it. So I think all enterprises will have to play their part, both large and small. Yeah.
Thank you. Antonella, I think you'd like to respond.
No, I would like to go back to what was said before about Singapore agreeing with Indonesia on an agreement. Yeah, I think that this is another very important value that the electricity grid brings: connectivity. When you connect regions, like all of Europe, we have one electricity system, but actually we can extend it. We could imagine having an electricity system that goes, sorry for saying this, all the way to Vladivostok, just in a continental scale. Do we really need it? Maybe not. But the point is that the more connect you are, the better you can smooth the variability of wind and solar. We are talking about a system that is going to be largely wind and solar. And the electricity system is actually the cheapest solution that we have today for storing and smoothing this variability. Also, the electricity system provides an additional service, which is solidarity. In this energy crisis, we have seen that solidarity with neighbors was fundamental. It has been fundamental for Moldavia. It is continued to be fundamental for Ukraine. Without the electricity grid, this would have not been possible. And so, again, energy regulators should be incentivized to look at values and not the cheapest possible solution.
You mentioned connectivity, and that brings us to our final round for today's panel, because we've heard of a few things that are really important: optimization, grids, reducing demand, but really international cooperation. And one of you mentioned it, Annalena Baerbock, Germany's federal foreign minister, said this morning, we have to do this together. We can only do it if we do it together, and connectivity is a part of this. International cooperation is a part of this, especially when it comes to global energy security. In your opinion, and I'll start with you, Karolina Nowak, what are the key drivers for successful international cooperation? You know, this solidarity that Antonella speaks about. What are the key drivers for that?
I think, well, the European model has it very well with and I'm just thinking about ENTSO-E, with ENTSO-G, with the common grids and it's there, it's in place. And I remember when we joined the European Continental Grid, which was actually planned in 2025, but this was all speeded up by the war that it started in Ukraine. This was a massive success for us, and in absence of being part of the grid, to the European Continental Grid, we were otherwise, I don't know, probably would have had huge blackouts. It was a matter of collaboration, cooperation, the free sea and the connectivity. In absence of it, we could not have faced supplying the right demand, the right supplies for our consumers. But I also want to make a point on the when we say renewables, I think we also need to look on what we actually have in the country. So, for instance, if my country is more agriculturally oriented, then we should identify opportunities in biogas, build on what you have at home. Think about also waste to energy projects. Yes, we will go ahead with the wind, which is has the highest capacity factor there. than solar. But I think this is the key element. Also build on what you already have within your country. Thank you.
Thank you. Building on what you have in your country is a key driver for successful international cooperation. Benoit Revaz of Switzerland, some key drivers from your perspective.
Switzerland actually has 41 interconnectors with the neighboring countries, so it's a very well interconnected country. So I can't underline enough how much value it brought, not only from Switzerland, but also for the neighboring regions. And still in the most difficult times for southern Germany to have the possibility to get capacity from Switzerland, and it goes on both sides. So the regulators, politicians can move a lot of things, but the physics is still there. And will have to be respected in the future. Of course, regulators have to face their citizens in the decisions they take, but in the future, cross-border solutions are much more promising than an island solution for any country in Europe and abroad.
Thank you very much. Antonella, you brought this topic of connectivity. I'd like to please tell us more about connectivity. Key drivers for international cooperation.
I think we can do much more than what we are doing today, and we should. And the idea that energy as a priority with regard to other challenges is probably wrong. Because today, this energy transition we do because of climate change, because of energy security. But very soon, energy security will be nothing if we don't have at the same time food security. And so international collaboration is essential to tackle these global challenges. And I repeat what I said at the beginning. Solutions are to be found in complexity, because usually something that works for one thing may well work for the other. And my main recommendation is never play nature against energy, because this will backfire and this will create huge delays and hamper this energy transition. But bring both at the table and you will find incredible opportunities.
Thank you very much, Antonella Battaglini. Claire McLaughlin, key drivers for successful international cooperation.
Yeah, so obviously one of them is about supply chains, and we've all been through 3 years of understanding what they look like and what they look like when they break. And so clearly, you know, we need to be working together to make sure that we have access to the intelligence, the materials, the capability to, you know, to move on an industrial scale to decarbonise our economies. So that's a pretty good starting point for needing to work with other countries. But I guess from the point of view of a big country in the middle of the Pacific, you know, small island states in the Pacific are highly exposed to climate change impacts. And as the region builds back tourism after the pandemic, building climate resilience for infrastructure to enable increased connectivity is absolutely critical. And so I think, you know, as rich countries, we have the opportunity and the obligation to make sure that this energy transition is not only just, but that it takes account of the people and the countries that will be most affected if we don't decarbonise quickly.
Thank you very much. Adrian Chua, key drivers.
I think one key driver for international cooperation in the renewable energy space is for governments to come together to agree on certain standards and regulations. So it's important that we foster convergence of standards, particularly in new areas. For example, in hydrogen, how do you go about certifying? whether hydrogen export or import is low carbon in nature. So I think there are different standards right now. I think there's scope for us to come together as governments to facilitate that convergence of standards. And I think here, a very good example, I think, of international collaboration is between Australia and Singapore. So we signed a green economy agreement recently that facilitates cooperation in these areas. And within that, we're looking at interoperability of certifications and so on. So I think that's a good example of how we can proceed. The other important area, I think, is that governments need to facilitate private capital and private investments into this, because governments can't fund all of this alone. So it's important that we mobilize private capital, and I think we can do this by helping to de-risk some of the major investments. And we can help de-risk by making sure that there's legal certainty in terms of the investments, as well as providing some degree of funding support, especially in the transition phase to renewables.
Thank you very much. You said something that I want to bring up. I mean, you talked about international cooperation, working together. That is what we're here to do at the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. It's been a real pleasure to host you all for this first panel here in the Europasaal. I'd like to introduce you one more time for our audience members. Karolin Novak, State Secretary for Decarbonization and Energy of Ministry, the Republic of Moldova. Benoit Revaz, the Director of the Federal Office of Energy in Switzerland. Antonella Battaglini, the CEO, Renewables Grid Initiative in Germany. Claire McLaughlin, the Head of Energy Division, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water in Australia. And Adrian Chua, the Deputy Secretary and Chief Sustainability Officer at the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us. Another round of applause for our panelists.